Are you a game changer, rule breaker, or just interested in the latest tech? If so, don't miss the largest gathering of tech and cyber pioneers the North has ever seen. DTX Manchester is returning to Manchester Central on the 2nd and 3rd of April, bringing you the very best tech solutions from local and global providers and helping you stay at the cutting edge and solving tomorrow's problems today. As part of Manchester's Tech Week, DTX Manchester is definitely not one to miss, powering the Northern Tech Revolution. This is the Secure CyberConnect podcast with Jay Adamson and Warren Atkinson, where we're joined by information and cybersecurity technology and talent acquisition professionals who share their journeys, unique perspectives, and offer advice and guidance. Our topics on this episode will be neuro-inclusion, inclusive design, and accessibility. Today, we're very excited to be joined by Sean Gilroy. After a career in finance, concluding as finance director for BBC North, Sean is now working as a senior user experience principal at the BBC and leads the workforce accessibility and inclusive design team focused on the strategy, development and delivery of accessible digital experiences to colleagues across the globe in BBC's public service operation, as well as exploring inclusive design methodologies to mitigate risks for underserved audiences through the digital transformation of public service broadcasting. Sean's also co-created BBC CAPE, Creating a Positive Environment, the BBC's award-winning Neurodiversity initiative, which sought design-led innovative solutions to remove barriers to employment for neurodivergent people. Through this work, Sean is now also current chair for NiON, the Neuro-Inclusive Organisations Network centred in Greater Manchester. Sean, welcome to the Secure CyberConnect podcast, and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you very much for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here.
So, Sean, if you'd be kind enough to give us a very brief, high-level overview of some of the key themes we'll be exploring in our discussion today, please.
Certainly. So, you've introduced my role as a senior UX principal. I'm interested in neuro-inclusion as part of inclusive design and accessibility. So we'll be exploring some of the topics, specifically around, what is inclusive design? How can it help us? Thinking both in terms of how we apply inclusive design to products and services that we offer, but thinking also more broadly about some of the benefits from diversity and inclusion, and thinking about, how do we practice that inclusive design, not just in that digital world, but potentially in our hiring, recruitment, and talent acquisition.
Absolutely. And we always start things off by asking our guests to share something that you're proud or excited about that isn't typically featured on your LinkedIn profile, for example.
I think I found this most difficult out of all the questions. So I would say it's not work related. I've got a couple of interests outside of work. So I'm into ultra marathons that started kind of during the pandemic. Obviously, the lockdown made me start craving open spaces. So I completed the Marathon de Sable, noted as the toughest foot race in the world. It's a run across, multi-stage race across the Sahara. I did that in 21. I was one of the 50% of the field. Unfortunately, there was a heat wave in the Sahara at that point, and also kind of a virus that kind of went across the camp as well. So an awful lot of people were incapacitated for various reasons. So quite a significant dropout. And since then, I've gone on to run in the Dragon's Back, most recently in ultras across Scotland, and looking for more things to do.
No, that's brilliant. Do commend you on that. When's the next sort of marathon or Tough Mudder as such?
I'm having to think about going back to do the Cape Wrath next year. So that's a 400-kilometre multi-stage race over 8 days from Fort William up to Cape Wrath on the north coast there in Scotland.
That's brilliant. Well, look, if you are raising money for any good causes, be sure to let us know. We can share that in the community platform as well as in future episodes with our audience.
Thank you very much. Much appreciated.
So, Sean, what advice would you give designers and product teams looking to create truly inclusive digital experience?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question, and it's probably more straightforward, really, in terms of the advice I can offer. I think it's thinking about designing for real world users, not just ideal ones. Personas can help us get to that place, but you can't really get kind of better behind the scenes in terms of, think about the co-design approach, thinking about, what UX research processes and methodologies you can follow to kind of really understand those real world examples and gather all the different kind of requirements that people have. So kind of get behind that real world user, make things intuitive. An awful lot of tech can be intimidating to people instead, and that can put people off. It can make processes and procedures, it can, the kind of the workflows overly complicated for people, and that can be really off-putting. I think it's thinking about opportunities to provide people with control over their experience as well. So allow them to personalize their experience, but don't overwhelm them with options. Understand how they want to approach those kind of, that particular workflow or that product or service, and think about how you can kind of tailor that to give them as much control as possible, but without overwhelming them doing that. And I suppose kind of following on from that is thinking about providing alternatives. So thinking about multiple ways, not a single solution very rarely will suit everybody all at the same time. So, again, it's kind of part of offering people control, really. Think about, what are those alternatives? What are the options that we could provide people that give people kind of different opportunities? So I think that's kind of approaching products and services and thinking about inclusive design. In terms of kind of the thought process behind it as well, I've thought about, inclusion is driven by diversity in teams. So think about the teams that you have a look around, think about those gaps that you can fill, and if there is a perspective missing, think about how you can approach that through the research. Thinking about humility as well through an experience. I mean, people are experts in what they do, they have a great deal of experience that they rely upon. But when you're thinking about inclusive experiences, you won't have all the answers. So just that element of humility, be a student for a day, find out what people do and how they do it, and think about, those lessons that you can learn, again, from those real world examples that you may not have experience of yourself. So there's kind of overcoming that technical expertise and just having an element of humility with it, I think. And we talk a lot about empathy in the design process. And I think it's completely relevant, but I think, we've all come across the term ruinous empathy. So I've started thinking more about kind of compassion in design that helps us overcome sometimes the ruinous empathy, that you can see a real world example and immediately all your focus goes to that one problem solving kind of issue, and you can put a load of resources into it and, you may find the solution, but you subsequently end up maybe at a dead end. You may end up ignoring other user experiences. So I think compassion enables you to have a more objective approach, in order to kind of find out where you're going and what the ideal solution or solutions may be to any particular problem that you see. So I kind of think of compassion as being one of those elements as well that we can bring to the conversation, perhaps over and above empathy.
No, that's brilliant. And from your experience, how do UX design patterns influence user trust and, of course, decision making?
Yeah, I think there's a great deal of influence in there. We talk a lot about kind of predictability and consistency in design and kind of how that enables people to build confidence with understanding processes for things, what icons mean, understanding just intuitively kind of, how your behavior interfaces with a product or a particular solution. But I think increasingly what we can do is sometimes kind of erode some of that confidence with some of the patterns just in terms of how we label things. So I don't know, there's a term I came across, confirm shaming. So making users feel guilty about opting in or out of something. So if you want to opt out of security, for example, the label might be, no, I don't care about security. And it's just that kind of discomfort that creates. And it can be done for the right purposes, maybe, but it's just thinking about some of those patterns. Pre-check data sharing boxes, tricking people or making people feel as if they're being tricked into certain decisions. Again, there may be good reasons behind it, but think about where that's applicable, how you can highlight that. And certainly fake urgency is things, putting timers on things, telling people that things are going to be deleted if you don't change or update something immediately. That can put a great deal of pressure on people as well. So, again, we can see why we put these things in. And I think often we're acting in good faith, but often, this trust in how we make decisions, if we can be more open and honest about it. I think also, within those, interestingly, my colleague who I work with and who's done some inclusive design research looking at different ethnic communities, ethnic minority communities. And I think that, what she did highlight is often kind of cultural differences in iconography and things that we place trust in, and the difference between often kind of this Western perceived understanding of a recognizable icon. A couple of examples through Lena's research, we found the home icon being a tiny little house with a roof on. It's not always an image that reflects culturally on how people see. An awful lot of people live in flats, high-rise blocks. So that particular icon of what home means doesn't necessarily, it doesn't infer the same pattern maybe as we presume it does. Again, system settings, so the little cog design, often in different cultures, they have little slider icons instead. So thinking about those different kind of patterns that we rely on and put trust in, if we're thinking from an inclusive design approach, it's kind of going a bit deeper and just thinking, are we talking to a specific community here, a certain cultural demographic that we're looking at, and how can we accommodate perhaps other cultures and other iconography patterns in UX, to try and make those experiences applicable everywhere in the globe. We're working in increasingly a global economy, certainly when it comes to digital products and services. So I think we've got to think, this is where inclusive design really comes in helping us think more broadly about the marketplace and the customers that we're looking to serve.
And I appreciate you sharing your perspective on that, Sean. What I'm getting is less of the stick, more of the carrot in that respect as well.
Yeah, I think I don't know. Maybe we're in a period, with the advent of kind of artificial intelligence, kind of AI, large language models. I think people are becoming more suspicious in terms of what they're being asked for and why are they being asked for all of this data and these opt-ins and opt-outs. I think people are growing a little bit more conscious about some of these things. So yeah, definitely, think about the opportunity of explaining why we're doing things rather than trying to influence or kind of persuade people subtly down a certain road, whether that be right or wrong for them.
No, most definitely. And Jay and myself have conversations most recently with technology and business leaders, and it's always around sort of the AI adoption, the business case for it. Obviously today we're here to briefly discuss the business case for AI, UX and accessibility. So how does AI and UX create both opportunity and risk for inclusivity, Sean, from your perspective?
It's a really interesting. I've had lots of different conversations, funnily enough, just this week, talking about accessibility and AI. And I think, clearly there is an opportunity that AI gives us, probably in terms of kind of increasing personalization. We talk about being able to give people, an individual experience that suits them, or being able to help them build an experience. And I think AI gives us that opportunity to personalize digital experiences for users in a way that we haven't been able to do it before. I think there's also the productivity and efficiency side of things as well. So we've seen AI being used in providing different languages for transcription or subtitling in different languages, making it an awful lot easier to provide an accessible or inclusive experience. I think in terms of the risks, I think they're kind of well documented, but I'm not entirely sure that we're really taking them as seriously as we should do. So in terms of the large language models that are often informing these experiences, there is significant bias in data. There is an awful lot of record in terms of AI systems kind of missing things out or making presumptions or kind of stereotypical presumptions, depending upon where those models have been trained. So I think the risks are that while I can see that push for kind of inclusion or kind of the adoption of AI technology to improve things, I think we are seeing the potential. For example, we're increasingly adopting assistive technology within the BBC that incorporates artificial intelligence, and that it transforms the experience for people. It enables that particular technology to do so much more. But at the same time, we're also seeing other workplace tools coming with AI embedded, and those tools aren't accessible for people that rely on assistive technology. So, potentially you're then creating this two-tier system in the workplace where you have people who might be seen as being more productive, more efficient, because they're using tools with AI that enables them to produce things quicker, to produce greater volumes of them. And, where those aren't compatible with assistive technologies, you may end up, there may be disabled colleagues, neurodivergent colleagues around a business that aren't able to use those tools. So their productivity appears to suffer as a result. So, is that going to affect career opportunities within an organization? Is it going to affect how we recruit people and how we see talent? Be that subtly, be that unconsciously, be that consciously. I don't know. So I think, we can, clearly the benefits are there. I just think it's, that there's an awful lot that we need to make, that we need to do in order to make sure that these products and services are inclusive, are accessible as part of that design process.
And going back to sort of the hiring process, we see a lot of organizations utilizing AI-driven tools in that hiring processes. Sometimes with chatbots, sometimes when it comes to the screening or just sort of pushing things through CRM system effectively and efficiently. But what are the risks that you're seeing when it comes to AI-driven hiring?
Well, yeah, I've been having a look at some of the papers. Again, it's kind of those large language models making assumptions around some of the applications that people put in. So, there have been cases found of age discrimination within applications where AI has filtered out applications from older people, depending upon the birth date that's been provided. Whereas that same application has been included when the date of birth was altered to reflect a younger age. And it's kind of, those patterns within AI that we may or may not notice because we're probably a lot less able to see these patterns on the other end. So, it's clear that there is the potential for discrimination in terms of using AI tools, workplace tools for hiring, workplace tools, in terms of those that we give to people in the workplace. So it's kind of, we have increasingly within kind of job applications, you can have thousands of people apply for roles. And clearly you can see that AI may have an application there in order to filter those applications through and to be able to provide shortlists in much quicker order. But I think, we have to be conscious about how it's filtering people. What are those processes? Do we understand the algorithms that AI is using? And do we need oversight? Do we need some form of human oversight, just to check, not just the ones that come through, but do we do some kind of quality check in terms of the ones that the AI tool may have rejected? Just to make sure that it's working right, that it's seeing the things that we need it to see, and it's not assuming things, that we don't agree with. So yeah, I think, it's just checking things with diversity in mind, I think.
Yeah, and that's something we see a lot of, especially with organizations adapting AI, for instance. Sometimes they let it run wild as opposed to sort of configuring it properly. And it always needs that human touch on things. And I think having guardrails in place, of course, are going to be beneficial. So more often than not, it's just the misuse of these tools and these resources. Now, on the sort of the basis of guardrails, for instance, how can businesses move beyond compliance and see inclusion as a competitive advantage rather than just a legal requirement, for instance?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I mean, there is a deal of research that exists in terms of, work that's been done to demonstrate a competitive advantage, for accessibility, for neuro-inclusion, over and above the legal requirement and the risk of falling foul of the law. I think it's interesting in maybe it's an approach. I think kind of ED&I, accessibility, inclusive design often are seen as nice things to do. Organizations often have strategies in place, business strategies in terms of sales and marketing and finance, all the clear ones that people know that they need to manage. If you incorporate strategies around ED&I, kind of sign up, understand the benefits that you can derive from equity, diversity, inclusion within organizations, make the most of those. I mean, I did make a note, some McKinsey research showing that gender diverse companies are 15% more likely to outperform their peers, and ethnically diverse companies are 35% more likely to do the same. And, there's, like I say, there's data out there to demonstrate there are benefits from this. So I think it's about approaching it strategically, put something in place, understand where you want to be, understand where you are now, and actively pursue this as an opportunity to improve your business, to improve the organization. Don't see it as just a kind of, it's more than just a page on the annual CSR report, the corporate and social responsibility impact. It is a proper strategy that people should recognize and start to incorporate in their organizations. Certainly, like I said, we're in a global organization. Sorry, we're in a global economy. So, if we're going to survive, if people are going to think about that long-term survival future, I think it's really important they approach this as a strategic imperative.
That's great. And are there any other measurable benefits that organizations have seen when it comes to investing in, obviously, neuro-inclusion, accessible design?
Again, there is an awful lot of data out there. I mean, in terms of the marketplace, the global disability market represents, I think it's an estimate, $8 trillion. I think that rises to 13 trillion when you include friends and family of disabled people as well. So, in terms of the impact of being an inclusive and accessible organization and being seen as an inclusive organization, in offering products and services that are accessible to people, there are competitive advantages, and there is a huge marketplace. Often that people, for whatever reason, don't assume or don't recognize. And a survey of Fortune 100 organizations found high-performing companies frequently practice disability inclusion as part of a diversity strategy. And there's other research saying that 86% of people prefer companies that cater to all users, and 64% are even willing to invest. And where products and services aren't accessible, a great deal of people, if they're not able to access that site, kind of 71% of people are seen to kind of leave and will go to a competitor. So I think there's clear data in there to say that kind of how you approach this affects your marketplace, affects how people see your organization, how they interact with your organization. And I think there's recent kind of market survey research as well, demonstrating that kind of inclusiveness enhances a firm's value proposition with customers. So if they see you as an inclusive organization, they are much more likely to approach you and to use you as a supplier of services and products. So, think about it in terms of access to marketplaces, think about it in terms of perception, in terms of brand perception, and all of these things, influence how people see the organization.
Yeah, we've seen that. We've seen organizations that have invested in inclusive and accessible design from a product and solution standpoint be able to attract more diverse individuals when it comes to talent acquisition, just because it's all on the front end. So appreciate you sharing your perspective, Sean.
In terms of workplace and AI and automation, everything we've discussed already, beyond hiring, what workplace policies or adjustments do you think can help maybe neurodivergent employees thrive? And maybe could you share an example of a company that's successfully integrated neurodivergent friendly work into their environment?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose beyond the hiring, I mean, for example, we at the BBC had an opportunity to think about neuro-inclusive design within move to central Cardiff. We moved our offices from the outskirts of Cardiff into the centre of the city. I'm working with the project designers, working with the project team inside the BBC. We introduced the team to neurodiversity, and we started thinking about how can we design this as a workplace that considers neuro-inclusion. What might that look like? So we used an awful lot of the tools that we generated through CAPE to educate people around what we're doing, what the perceptions from neurodivergent people were, and we were able to kind of influence the design in that building. So thinking about kind of the sensory challenges within the workplace and being able to introduce different workstation styles. So whether you're looking for collaborative work, whether you're looking to work in isolation, in a quiet place to focus, we generated these different elements of the building to enable people to find the spaces that worked for them at the right time in a particular workday. We thought about kind of sound and putting baffling in the ceilings to kind of deaden the sound a little bit, because obviously, these are open plan offices that can be distracting for people. And we had, we thought about adaptive lighting and LED lights throughout the building so that luminescence throughout the building adjusts according to the amount of daylight coming through the windows from the outside of the building. And the color schemes, the patterns, the decor, all of these things kind of enhanced collaboration and communication within teams in that building. And we were able to then kind of share those lessons with other organizations, and they helped inform now a British standard, SI standard, looking at neuro-inclusion within building design. And all of these things, these are factors that don't just help neurodivergent employees, but they help everybody in terms of the culture in an organization, the flexibility of our ways of working, how we communicate, what opportunities there are. There's all been times when we've been distracted by noise, by conversations at work. So being able to think about where you're going to go, it's more important if you're neurodivergent, but it can help you if you're neurotypical. And I think, the other benefits, we think about culture. I think there's the statement that kind of, culture eats strategy for breakfast, they say. And, a culture in an organization is effectively, as an event, somebody mentioned it, culture is the worst behavior that an organization is willing to accept. So if we accept things are inaccessible, if we accept that things are not flexible, then we don't build an accessible culture. And that can flow through to the products and services that we offer to our customers. So I think, beyond kind of hiring practices is thinking about what is the culture that you want for the organization? How do we make sure that culture is inclusive? How do we make sure that the things that we offer to our staff are accessible? It's important for us at the BBC, for example, if we're going to generate products and services that are accessible to the population of the UK that we serve, to our license fee payers, it's important that we have a body of staff and a workplace that enables us to reflect the audience that we serve. And that helps us subsequently to meet our strategies and objectives for delivering services to audiences. We've seen, there's lots of examples that you can find in terms of SAP have a neuro-inclusive strategy, JP Morgan, Ernst & Young. There are a great many different organizations that are now thinking about, policies and adjustments to the recruitment, to ways of working, thinking about, how do we work flexibly and accessibly, to provide a workplace that subsequently helps us to thrive and survive in these uncertain times.
Yeah, I mean, it's clear that those organisations that are integrating accessibility, from the start rather than afterthought, are obviously benefiting, considerably. And what do you think some of the biggest misconceptions are that prevent companies from prioritising inclusive design? And how do you think they can be addressed?
I was trying to have a think about, in my experience, what have I seen in terms of, I think there's kind of three main things that I hear feedback on. I think one, there's a misconception that people are already doing it. We don't need to think about that because it's already in our policies, in our processes. And very often, it's simple. It's kind of show me where it's written down then, and I'll believe you. And it's like, it's difficult to find things written down that says, inclusive design is part. I mean, for example, Google, their mission statement has accessibility in as part of what they do, and as a result, it threads throughout the organization. So I think there's a misconception in terms of inclusive design that people are already doing it because they probably do bits, but is it consistent? Is it, a proper methodology that they approach in terms of how they design their services and their products? I think there's also a misconception about how important this is, in terms of your kind of market reach. I've mentioned kind of, the economic factors, but in terms of the demographics, if you're thinking about inclusive design from an accessibility perspective, I think 24% of the UK are disabled. And in terms of the global population, it's around 16%. So, these are not small communities that we're thinking about when we're incorporating inclusive design into our processes.
It's funny, I saw something on the news this morning about the statistics. It was a piece that was on BBC Breakfast, and it's surprising, really, as you say, the percentages and versus the lack of I think, facility, even basic facilities, for example, in terms of, we're talking about booking hotels and various things like that. So yeah, it's interesting statistics that make you realise how little has been done towards this, really, I guess, historically.
It is. Yeah, exactly. And then if you think about minority ethnic communities, if you think about social economic diversity, if you think about the recent challenge in terms of designing around gender and how the majority of our products, the things that we rely on every day were initially designed around a male person, an average male, as opposed to an average female. It's quite quickly, if you look at all the minorities and think inclusive design covers all of these, you'll end up with a much bigger percentage of people than you first thought of. So I think the other thing then is around time and cost. We haven't got enough time to research everything. We haven't got, the cost is kind of unrealistic. But this is about kind of, again, how you optimize your research. Yes, it's not possible to find everybody's individual preference, but we have increasingly tools that will enable us to personalize experiences. As we've spoken about, in terms of AI, research can be done effectively. There's an awful lot of research out there that you could perhaps rely on. You can have focus groups. Again, it's the importance of diversity in organizations. If your organization is diverse, you're much more likely to capture these perspectives as part of the design process when you're first thinking about who are we designing this for? What are the opportunities? What are the barriers that we want to overcome for our customers or audiences? So yeah, I think those three areas tend to be kind of the main challenge, I think, that we get. And I think it's just adapting your approach, realizing it's worthwhile, realizing the value in it, and having to think about ways around those barriers.
I mean, it's clear, from everything you've been discussing, that AI automation is massively reshaping workplace accessibility and neuro-inclusion efforts. What other emerging trends in technology do you see shaping maybe the future of accessibility and neuro-inclusion?
I think it's just the opportunities that AI offers us around personalization and how quickly we're going to be able to offer that. I think it's, I've just mentioned kind of, it's not necessarily possible to design things around individual preferences, but I think AI is increasingly going to offer us the opportunity to do that. If we're thinking just about offering subtitling, for example, on programs or transcriptions in different languages, so we're able to broaden our offer very, very quickly. At the moment, there are potentially still challenges around accuracy in subtitles, which is something that we've got to think about, because we don't want to be misinforming an audience or customer base because the subtitles aren't quite right, or they're not capturing the nuance of a conversation, or they're slightly delayed. So we've got to think about that. But, I think increasingly it's just about, the different kind of opportunities that we have to make things more available for more people and personalize those different experiences. I mean, the assistive technology tools, for example, we're seeing screen readers with AI enabled. So, it's able to do much more. It's able to describe what might be on somebody's screen rather than just looking at text. You've got kind of products like Be My Eyes, using AI so that you can use your phone to describe your environment, quite accurately. So, there are huge advantages to this. There comes kind of risks and challenges that we're also dealing with, that we deal with as an organization, in terms of security and data protection. We've got to think about what these things have access to. But I think, that's in, I don't know, the next 3 to 5 years. I think that's going to be really exciting. And I think kind of opportunities around extended reality, kind of augmented reality, I don't think we've seen that come through quite yet. I think maybe as training tools, I think they offer, we played around in CAPE using VR as a way of showing people or giving people an experience, a neurodivergent experience of the workplace, not a simulation, but just kind of an exercise in compassion, really, to try and explain what we mean by kind of sensory challenges within a workplace. So thinking about how that can extend, how do we make that virtual world, that augmented reality accessible? That's going to be a challenge, but it offers us huge potential in terms of kind of training opportunities, ways of working, that I think we've still got and still have yet to explore.
And let's talk a little bit more about, you know, how your work with CAPE and NiON has influenced the conversation around accessibility in tech and cyber. You know, just maybe expand on that a little bit if you'd be so kind, Sean.
Yeah, I was talking about humility before at the beginning in terms of what we do and how we do it. So I don't want to say that I've influenced necessarily the industry around tech and cyber in terms of the work that we've done. I like to think that it's one probably of a number of initiatives that have hopefully expanded the conversation. We first started CAPE 10 years ago, and you know, people were maybe aware of things like autism and dyslexia, but neurodiversity was certainly a new word. And in terms of experiences, impacts of the workplace, of the environment, society on neurodivergent people, you know, very rarely understood. It was typically people were aware of the stereotype of what being autistic was. So I'd like to think that you know, we've familiarized people with the term, with the reference. I'd like to think that we've offered people, you know, as I said, the VR tool. We've done kind of first person films to try and think about how do we use technology to engage a new audience and a new subject in a way that hopefully will drive again a kind of empathy and compassion around thinking about inclusive experiences and accessibility, certainly in the workplace. So in terms of as an industry, I'd like to think that we've expanded that conversation. We've been able to move, you know, neurodivergent conditions like autism, dyslexia, dyspraxia, ADHD, kind of away from this kind of the medical approach, the medical model, into more of a social model of disability, into people recognizing the value, the strengths, the opportunities that they can have from bringing people into the organization.
100%, 100%. I think people are seeing, you know, we're having conversations now where these things are being seeing more of an enhancement and a gift often than not than the previous narrative that surrounded them, as you say, historically. So yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely.
and it's you know, we talk about the strengths and opportunities. I think, you know, it's you know, worth remembering also, you know, the kind of the disabling element certainly of some of the conditions as well. So it's thinking about, you know, like I said, it's that social model. So kind of, you know, we're thinking about impairments that people may have. You know, it's thinking about what we can do in society and in the environment to make things more accessible, so that we're looking at fixing the environment, you know, not fixing the person.
And Sean, where have you seen organisations or individuals perhaps go wrong in that respect?
I think it's often trying to it's that focus on how do we make or how do we help the individual to conform to what we do? How do we change them to learn how to fit more in with what we do and our culture and our ways of working? And I think, you know, that's taking that perspective of thinking about, you know, there's something wrong with the person, or they just have to learn how to do it and they'll be fine. And I think, you know, that as an approach is you know, it's which is why I think I talk about kind of compassion and humility and learning about these experiences, which is why an awful lot of the time, you know, we spent building the tools to try and help explain that narrative and help tell that story. This isn't something that people learn how not to be. It's about, you know, how we allow any one of us to be who we are, you know, and find ways of working so that we can get the best out of people. You know, if we think everybody has a talent, everybody has experience, you know, we're talking about people qualified for the roles. You know, it's about how do we make sure that the workplace that we have is suitable for those people. It's effectively just giving people the right tools. We wouldn't expect anybody to work without a laptop these days. We wouldn't expect anybody to make, you know, to shape metal without tools. You know, it's exactly the same thing, but we're just talking about it from kind of a human experience condition perspective. So, you know, how do we provide people with the right tools and the right environment so that they can do their best work and help us make the things that we make? And it's basically as straightforward as that, I think.
I appreciate you sharing there, Sean. And could you share with the audience perhaps some key first steps that organisations can take to move beyond, of course, just awareness and implement lasting change when it comes to accessibility?
It's establishing a kind of, you know, a process. It's recognizing, that this is something that you're doing as a strategic imperative. This is part of what you do and how you build things. I think a good start is kind of understand where you are at this moment in time. So there are an awful lot of models out there that people can have a look at with regards to accessibility audits or inclusion audits, kind of maturity models, so that you can see, what are your policies, what is your procurement policy, how, do you have teams of people thinking about these things in different places? What is your approach to building accessible and inclusive products and services? Do you have training in place for teams around the organization, both in terms of that technical capability? So, do they understand accessibility standards, things like WCAG, the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, and how to apply those? Do you are you able to also understand what accessibility means and an awareness of disability in terms of situational impairments and kind of, those different elements of accessibility that you can cater for? Do you have staff employee resource groups, for example? How do you have conversations within your organization? How do you find out what people's experiences are? And then once you understand kind of where you are and where you sit within those processes, what are those metrics? Kind of how do you measure improvement? What are you going to do? Where do you put it in? What are those KPIs or OKRs that you want to use in order to demonstrate a progress and momentum to achieve the desired goal or result? And how do you bring people with you on that journey? I think, one of the things we kind of had a reset here at the BBC a couple of years ago, and we adopted a service design approach. So kind of, we ran a project internally. We researched this, interviewing staff kind of across the business in different roles, different places. So it was kind of a broad research thing across different levels of hierarchy as well. So from kind of senior executives to kind of new joiners in the organization, to kind of understand and gain that picture of where were we and what were the major issues that people experienced around the business. And then we used that to start building some objectives. We used that to try and find answers to overcome some of the challenges or barriers that people were identifying within our policies and processes, within how we trained people. So we use that as a basis, and we're now following that as a strategy, kind of like a 5-year approach now.
Yeah, we spoke about driving change from perhaps the grassroots level, from the bottom up. And you mentioned obviously leadership and executives there. How important is senior leadership and executive sponsorship when it comes to driving meaningful change and progress in building truly inclusive workplaces?
I think it's critical, to be honest, from kind of a couple of perspectives. I think whether senior leaders kind of realize it or not, their behaviors create the culture around an organization. I mentioned at the beginning, culture is like the worst behavior you're willing to accept. So seeing what your leaders do, seeing what senior executives do, and that kind of filters through the business as well. So, the minimum level or kind of, that the thing that you're willing to let go will build the culture around the organization. So seeing what your senior leaders are doing as well as what they're saying is important. You can't just get away with saying this is important to us, you should all do it. You have to demonstrate that. You have to show how willing you are to do that. So it's simple little quick things, as a senior leader in an organization, if you sit on the executive boards, ask the simple question: if you're going to, have an all hands, or you're communicating to your staff, ask your team, is what we're doing accessible? Will people be able to read this, to hear this, to see this? It's a simple enough question. So as well as doing it, make sure that everybody can access it. And I think, the other thing is we have senior leaders around the organization that are disabled, that are neurodivergent, and sharing their experiences, sharing the challenges that they've had from a personal experience. We talk, an awful lot of the lived experience narrative that people can share helps us all build compassion with somebody's experience and somebody's journey. And, having somebody senior share their journey is liberating to the whole organization. Everybody will feel more able to disclose, more able to have those conversations, because they know somebody senior understands that, and all the people in the middle, from the very top down to the bottom, the people in the middle will start realizing, that they have something to do here, that this is a conversation that is their responsibility to have. So I think it just helps everything flow through organizations where senior leaders are engaged in the conversation.
It enhances that shared accountability. You get the buy-in from individuals at all levels, especially if senior leadership are coming across as human beings, because more often than not, there is that culture internally of us and them, and I think that human side to show weakness and empathy allows that to be broken down.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like I say, it's more than just saying this is what we do. It's how you exhibit it. It's people follow and see your actions, consciously or unconsciously. So what you're willing to let slide, people will pick up on, and they'll let it slide as well.
Definitely. And we hear a lot of chatter on the airwaves, as well as sort of in-person events, about a talent shortage, especially within the sort of technology and cybersecurity remit. And we certainly, something myself and Jay don't agree with, especially when it comes to tapping into pockets of talent of neurodiverse individuals, for instance. I recently read a study which highlighted around about, I think it was 7 out of 10 individuals with neurodiversity are actually unemployed at this point in time globally. And as you mentioned earlier, the workforce, I think, is 1 in 8 or 1 in 7 have neurodiversity. So there is a huge amount of individuals out there that need employment that we can tap into and leverage their superpowers as such. And I know we've discussed how organizations can make the hiring process more inclusive, and of course, workplace design helps business tap into those overlooked talent pools. But what other policies and initiatives perhaps have proven to be most effective in helping neurodivergent employees succeed in their careers, from your perspective, Sean?
I mean, when we first started out on BBC Cape, we ran some research to kind of find out what the barriers were that people were experiencing in the workplace. Stigma was far and away the biggest issue. If people don't feel comfortable to share their experiences or to ask for adjustments or support in their workplace, they won't get that support. And as a result, they will struggle and probably eventually decide to leave. It's one of those biggest challenges is just overcoming that stigma within an organization's culture, I think. How do you open up the conversation? How do you open up opportunities to allow people to understand what adjustments are available? So, in a lot of cases, people are reluctant to kind of ask for adjustments because they don't know what adjustments exist, or they may be fearful that what they're asking for is too much. They don't know if it works or not, because they may not have been in that environment before. So I think it's important to think about the policies and processes that you design in the environment so that these places are as inclusive as possible when people join. And it then comes down to kind of training people to enable them to have conversations that matter. And I think, one of the biggest things that people can get behind is it's that skill of active listening. So if somebody's trying to explain to you where they find things challenging, what they're finding difficult, rather than trying to jump into a solution mode or to leave the problem with them, spend that time, actively listen to what they're saying and engage in a conversation. It comes back to the humility thing I think I mentioned at the very beginning. Be a student for a period of time, listen to what somebody's telling you, and then work with them. Solutions and accommodations at work for this week and next week and the next month or 3 months might not work after that. They may get to a point where, okay, I'm at a level now, I get this, and then you'll need to think of something else. I think it was interesting. I was reading a diversity report from the National Cybersecurity Council back in 2021. I think they did one with KPMG. And I think they said that there was over a fifth of people that they surveyed said they'd experienced discrimination in the last year. So, as you were saying, there's a shortage of talent in the industry. There are talent pools out there that are kind of ripe for accessing if we can accommodate them in our workplace. But that's the issue. We are potentially limiting that talent pool and limiting their ability to operate effectively in this particular industry. So, it's kind of, bringing in much needed resource, much needed talent. And if that environment isn't inclusive and accessible, you're almost shooting yourself in the foot because you're not allowing that talent to succeed in the roles that you've provided for them.
Most definitely, and information and knowledge sharing is certainly important. We see a lot of teams and organisations, be internally facing and not collaborating cross-sector. And we appreciate events, initiatives, and podcasts such as this encourage that cross-sector collaboration. But none more importantly than in-person events. And we understand you're going to be talking at DTX Manchester in April of this year. It's an event that myself and Jay have attended quite often, certainly added value to the wider technology industry and organisations across the North. And I know we've discussed earlier in the podcast, the importance of community and social networking. So how do you see events such as DTX London and DTX Manchester help us foster community and networking across important topics, especially when it comes to UX, for instance?
I think they're crucial. I think they give opportunities for people to meet in person. I think certainly when you're talking about topics or subjects that are maybe tangential to kind of the industry that you're actually working in. So things like neurodiversity, neuro-inclusion, accessibility, inclusive design. I think enables people to, like I said, it enables people to exhibit that humility and be a student for the day, no matter what your position in that organization, whether you've just started or whether you lead that particular company or organization. You can go there, you can learn from people. People are sharing what they're doing, how they're doing it, what works, what doesn't. And it's a great opportunity to kind of share those lessons, because I think, if people could share a lesson about kind of what they've tried, whether it's worked or whether it hasn't, if people can be honest in these places, it helps other people to consider that and maybe overcome some of those shortcomings or those barriers early on in their process so they can leap ahead. So you're effectively standing on the shoulders of other people in the industry, and it helps everybody to move along much more quickly. And it's just great places when you're talking to people and meeting new people to explore what they're doing, how they're doing it, what their experiences are. So I think it's kind of crucial to bringing people together in a space covering a great many different things, and like just going away, even from the perspective of, I know I do it, you kind of go away and you're just enthused again. It's kind of, it provides that additional drive to keep going, to try something new. Or just get the confirmation that perhaps you are on the right path. You just got to keep going.
Definitely. And from your perspective, DTX, as I mentioned, is an event that myself and Jay have travelled across to quite often. Why have you chosen to speak? You've obviously seen success with the BBC. You've led initiatives. Why DTX in particular?
Well, it's going to the DTX in Manchester, so it's kind of, it's a local place. It's something that therefore, I'm really eager to be able to support, thinking about growing those industries, growing that knowledge base across the Northwest. And again, it's an opportunity for me to go along. I don't get the opportunity to go to events like this particularly often, so I make the most of when I am able to get. And it gives me an opportunity to kind of learn from other people that are in similar trades, similar industries to mine. Again, I'm going there to be a student for the day. I've got to offer my experiences, but I know that I don't have all the answers. I know that maybe some of the solutions I'm pursuing may or may not work. So if I can circumvent that and get to the end process that is going to work more quickly by listening to other people, then that's what I'll do, and I can find out more about what's going on. So yeah, a couple of reasons for going for me.
No, that's great. And obviously focusing on NiON and CAPE, are there any other initiatives or programs perhaps out there or non-profit organisations that help advance accessibility when it comes to neurodiverse groups, for instance, and UX? Is there anything else you want to highlight?
I mean, yeah, I think, we've seen a kind of a growth of non-profits, of specialist organisations kind of out there, an awful lot of charities in this space that talk around neurodiversity, talk about disability, places that you can go. I mean, there are probably far more than I can particularly mention, but it's easy enough to find them. It's easy enough to do a search, whether you're looking for national ones, local ones. There's an awful lot more out there, I would say. So yeah, have a look. Yeah, there's a lot of information that you can get, a lot of kind of knowledgeable people, and it will just help you on your journey to kind of get out there, and treat it as an important part of the business.
Yeah, absolutely. And Sean, listen, some amazing insight and some really valuable, insight into, I guess, the whole of the most important work that you're doing in terms of inclusive design. What does the future hold for yourself and NiON then, and going forward as we wrap things up? Where do you see things going for you guys?
Well, in terms of NiON, we're relatively new into this space. I think, we'd love to grow the community that we have. I'm talking a lot about kind of how we learn from each other. And that's the whole point of NiON, is that we are kind of an open community of organizations looking to improve neuro-inclusion. And we're going to do that by kind of sharing our lessons with each other effectively. So what are you doing that's worked? What have you done that hasn't worked? Where are the areas that you're experiencing problems, challenges, or barriers? And how, as a community, might we help each other to overcome those barriers and find solutions that kind of work across those organizations? So we're operating on a principle very much, a rising tide lifts all boats. So yeah, we just want to continue that work and build on events, kind of work with organizations to see, what are the gaps they're experiencing? How might an organization like NiON help them and help others?
As always, community is key, Sean. Community is key. And for any of our listeners who want to stay connected beyond the episode, where else can they reach out to you aside from LinkedIn, of course?
And the BBC app.
Absolutely. Well, I'd say LinkedIn is the best place, to be honest, both for me and for NiON. There is a site on LinkedIn. People can kind of request to join on there. Yeah, and by all means, ping me a message. LinkedIn's the only platform out there that I've got. We kind of open source a lot of the stuff that we've done through CAPE. So there is a website that we've put an awful lot of our work on. So bbc.co.uk/neurodiversity. You've got BBC content around neurodiversity. You've got some of the toolkits that we've built, some of the stories that I've discussed here that you can get access to.
Well, look, Sean, thank you so much. I'm sure everybody who's been listening today will have found a lot of value in the episode. For people who want to continue the discussion, for more sustained engagement, as always, we invite you to join the Secure CyberConnect community, where we offer a range of collaborative solutions for both tech and security professionals at no cost. These will include expansive community access, mutual mentoring, online networking, and exclusive interviews such as this, panel discussions and masterclasses coming throughout 2025. If people want to know more, gain access to the community in any of our initiatives, please visit secure-recruitment.com/cyber-connect/. Thank you very much, everybody.
If you're enjoying today's session, please follow and rate on Spotify. Thank you.